Alright YouTube, it's time for Occult video 52 on vampirism. The different kinds, the different meanings, what I think of the topic of vampirism in general. Gonna get into a little bit of it all. Now first we have to categorize what is thought of as actual vampirism, because there are multiple traditions of vampirism. I'm not speaking just about like the Aswang from the Philippines or something like that. I'm talking about more of the European tradition when I speak of vampirism. And in many ways, the modern tradition as well, apart from anything more authentic, let's say, within the occult. The first concept is literally the blood-drinking person or someone afflicted with some sort of condition. This is sanguinarianism. There are multiple reasons why somebody might do this. Now, in New England, here where I'm from, it bears mentioning. Fears of vampirism here had to do with contagion with tuberculosis back in the 1800s and 1700s as well. There is a literal supposed vampire that had been burned to ashes and put in a burial urn, buried, for instance, in the town, small village where I was from called Woodstock, Vermont. That's where I lived when I was younger. And in the green, at the very center, underneath an enormous granite slab, actually is an urn full of vampire remains. Now, this afflicted individual was simply a tuberculosis patient. Tuberculosis set in, this person started dying, other people were infected after they died. They didn't really understand decomposition. And so when they disinterred the body and found that there was like dried blood on the mouth and that the body hadn't decomposed fully, which is what happens when you bury somebody in the ground, let's face it, the maggots don't necessarily eat them away. They thought that it was a continuously reanimating presence that was infecting others with this disease through vampirism, through actually drinking their blood. Any mark on the body was evidence they had been bitten by a vampire. Blood on a corpse meant it was a vampire. They'd burn it, or they'd disinter it and rip it apart or something. They did horrible things at the time. This was their superstition. But that goes beyond it. The meaning of blood in that respect was sort of the symbol of the contagion that they were worried about at the time. In the modern sense, most sanguinarians are it's either a fetish, they're getting a sexual rush out of doing it, or it overlaps with the second category, which is psychic vampirism. Now, a psychic vampire could be considered like an extreme introvert, someone they say, oh, I'm missing a couple chakras or something, and they drag some Eastern philosophy therein. Other people would drink blood to try to balance their mood in some way. It's sort of a psychological act. Now, you can go into whether you believe there's any occult phenomenon going on here or not. I choose to remain ambivalent because I honestly don't care. But the act itself isn't vampirism in the sense of I'm going to drink your blood tribe because if I don't do this every night, then I shrivel up. If I go out in the sun, I get burned by the sun and stuff. There are people that live that kind of lifestyle, though, and that brings us to the third category, which are people, they're just culturally, they act like, like Bram Stoker's Dracula. They act like the specifically European, the Englishized version of Vlad the Impaler taken into a fictional account. That's what they act like. And it's cultural. It's an offshoot of sort of gothic culture or emo culture in some respects, you might say. But it's not real vampirism in the sense of being based on an occult tradition. It's just a culture. It's a way that people act. It's like if you were to take necromancy and you were to have a group of people who repeatedly, they wear nothing but black robes and they hang out in graveyards. They're not actually practicing necromancy. They've been influenced by the idea that that should be overlapped onto part of a subculture. Then there are also, I would say, cosmic vampires. These are people that drain energy from the universe around them, from space around them. It has nothing to do with other people. It is an occult practice. It fits in well with chaos magic to an extent. It fits in certainly with demonolatry. Or they're getting that energy from some other dimension or from other entities, demons you might term them, or something like that. That would be more of the newer authentic version. In the original authentic version, where we're not talking about medical anomalies, what we're literally talking about is Vlad the Impaler, who didn't drink blood on a regular basis, although there are tales that he dipped his bread in the blood of his enemies after impaling them. He was a sadist. He was apparently aroused to some extent by the sort of things that he did. But he was also an effective warrior, I would say, considering that he used to cut down tens of thousands of his foes despite being completely outnumbered and completely outweaponized. That is, his troops were fighting with longbows and swords, and his enemies had cannons and muskets, and yet he still managed to win more battles than he lost. He was quite a vicious character. As far as vampirism goes psychologically, though, if you look at like Bram Stoker's work, it's really a notation on human sexuality. Blood is literally a symbol for sexual desire there. Vlad sort of represents the upstanding, lustful gentleman. Then there are other characters as well, and they really fit in within archetypes of different types of people that a Victorian woman might want to be with. There's the brilliant man, and there's the hard-working man, and there's the handsome, young, strong man, and then there's Dracula, this figure of just primordial lust that sort of takes control, and is seen at the time, really by Victorian society, as an impolite thing. It's not seen as something good. Within the more authentic occult traditions, though, if you read grimoires from the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, if you read all of these occult works, you have relatively little on the topic of vampirism, anything remotely similar to what we understand it to be today. The closest approximation you're going to get most of the time is some sort of spirit, demon, or other entity. Demon not in the original Greek tradition, but in sort of the medieval tradition. Some sort of entity which is causing sickness, like the New England tradition with tuberculosis. It causes sickness, it causes weakness. For instance, with consumption, which is what they term tuberculosis. A person can literally just start wasting away. They start coughing their lungs out. They don't otherwise, there aren't sores all over their body necessarily. They're not shitting all over themselves. They're not running a high fever necessarily. They're just wasting away. The disease is eating away at their vitality. Until they look older than they are, they slowly shrivel up and then become a literal corpse. It's a type of leeching, a type of draining. Interestingly enough, of course, blood in medicine at the time, they were still applying leeches to people. And they're still doing that now because it turns out it's at least a little bit effective for certain maladies. They even apply maggots to people's wounds now. Lab-raised maggots that are actually, they don't have diseases, and they debride the dead flesh away, and it's actually a really great way to treat gangrene and other conditions like that. In the most authentic form, when we're not talking about blood drinking in the New Age manner or in, like, Vlad the Impaler sex party manner, and if we're not talking about those that practice chaos magic or demonolatry and may indulge in certain aspects we might term vampiric in nature, and if we're not talking about people who have simply adopted it as a sort of culture, as a sort of style in some way or another, what we're really thinking about is the very concept of leeching. Not necessarily the empowerment of one individual by leeching another. Like, play a video game, if there's vampirism in it, tendency is, vampire recovers their health when vampirizing someone. The other one's being harmed. It's a parasitic sort of thing. In the more authentic sense, as it's generally going to be treated in ancient times, or in, Victorian society with sickness, or even pre-Victorian society with sickness there, it's just a withering away of somebody. It's not really benefiting any sort of host. You could even tie it in with the concept, at the height of the Black Death, of the miasmas. People just start getting sick. They can't trace the cause. They have no idea what's happening. It's just a foul wind that's causing people to be infected. Maybe it's leeching their life away. It's just cutting them down, young and old, healthy and sick alike. They're just all dying, and we don't know why. It's really, in a way, when you're looking at it, it has more to do with the misunderstanding of contagion. The inability of man to understand that there were life forms that were too small to see really feeds into the vampire panics that we see over time. Otherwise, the most historical thing we can say is, yes, Vlad occasionally drank blood. He certainly appears to have had no problem with the sight of blood, and he certainly drank a lot of red wine while watching his victims suffer because he felt that it was something to celebrate. We might call it brutal today. He called it survival. Back then, people called it just, well, our nation's going to remain autonomous. We're not going to let the Ottomans march in here and tell us what to do, or in a million other cases, two nations are struggling, what we would consider torture or war crimes. They didn't have a problem with it back then. As long as the tyrant wasn't doing it to his own people too much, generally people didn't care if some foreigners got hung up on a pike at the time. So yes, vampirism comes in various forms. That's important to understand because a lot of people, they think of vampire, they think of Dracula. And they think, oh, well, yeah, vampirism, oh, he gets stronger when he drinks people's blood, or at least he stays alive, or something like that. That's not exactly the way that it works in an authentic tradition. That's about all. Peace out.